Hi everyone, welcome to a different kind of video. Today I'll be recapping my experience as I've recently just finished the campaign for Path of Exile. I've slept on it and I have many thoughts. So I wanted to kind of vent to you guys, talk to you about what I loved, what I didn't like so much, and basically my overall experience. If you haven't seen those videos, go check them out. I had such a great time, and thanks to you guys, I managed to finish it in one piece somewhat. Let's start with the technical state of the game. So I'm running a pretty beefy computer here. I've got a 4070 Ti, a really good CPU, so I wasn't expecting to have any issues, and to no surprise, I didn't have any issues. I was running at a solid 144 frames per second. Now, I wonder how that's gonna continue in terms of the performance in endgame, considering the amount of visuals you're getting thrown at all times. I'm also curious to how this game runs on lower end systems. For me though, I didn't have any issues whatsoever. Maybe a few hiccups here and there, but I don't think they had anything to do with the game itself. Maybe my computer had an issue, I don't know. On top of that, I played through Steam directly. I know there's a custom launcher for Path of Exile, but I just played through Steam. When it comes to the story and the setup of Path of Exile, it's kind of set in a dark fantasy world, the world of Rayclast, right? I think that's how you pronounce it. And the story, in my opinion, was great if you were up to the challenge of following it. I don't think it was easy to follow the story. Basically, at the start, you're in exile and you wake up on a beach on the Forsaken Shores, and you kind of go from there. And you have this experience of being level 1 and climbing up, right? That's an important part of any game, the progression system, which we'll speak about in a second. As soon as you're in the game, you're clicking, you're hitting, it looks good, and soon enough, you start to meet other bands of survivors on this beachfront. And that's really when Act 1 starts and the game starts, really. You start encountering characters that you're going to see throughout the whole game, and I actually like the fact that these characters come back in other acts. I do feel like the storytelling is seen as a backdrop to the game's mechanics rather than a driving force by most players, meaning that out of 100 players of Path of Exile, I think maybe 2 or 3 actually know what's going on at any given time. And I don't think that's the fault of the other people. I just think that the game's mechanics are pushed harder than the story is, for good reason too. But if you're interested in the lore and in the story, there's a lot to chew on there. It's obviously a rich game with lots of lore, but I feel like the delivery of the lore was more like a history book. I didn't feel like the storyline itself was that engaging. What I would really like to do is replay the whole campaign, taking my time and reading every single thing, just kind of understanding the story. That brings us on to progression systems. So the character progression as I went through the game was obviously highly customizable, but also not so much. If you followed my series, you remember that I purposefully didn't follow any guides, and I kind of tried to make my own way through the skill tree, which was really daunting. And in a way, it wasn't a true no guide run, because I would read the comments and I would kind of follow your advice, which meant that I was steered in a certain direction, which I think had a lot to do with the fact that I was able to complete all 10 acts. And that's kind of one of my negatives, I guess, for the game itself, is that if you don't follow a guide or a build, which I guess is part of the fun, but if you don't follow a guide or a build, you're going to have a really hard time. It's very difficult to bounce back from bad choices in the skill tree. So if you have no experience with ARPGs, I'm not sure this game is the first one to jump into if you're not following a guide, if you kind of want to make your own way through. We'll see how I feel about following a guide the next time I play the campaign. This time around, I'll be following a guide to the letter. I even downloaded some software that helps me put the points in and stuff like that, so hopefully I wouldn't have any issues there. I really like the idea of the acts. I felt like every act became more and more bombastic, explosive, interesting the more we went along, where the first few acts are quite reserved, level 1 character and an MMORPG kind of quests, and then it becomes a lot more. In terms of progression systems as a whole, you've got, of course, the skill tree, you've got completing quests, exploring all the dungeons and stuff like that, defeating the enemies, the bosses. But one thing that kept coming back to me was the sheer number of systems that are there for you to interact with. It seems like every single system they added season by season, they kept in the game in a way or another, and you're introduced to them one at a time every act. And I really like that, because it just means that you're not only progressing your skill tree, but you can also be progressing progressing your menagerie or your thievery and other things. And it just made the game feel so complete and so unending in a way. There's definitely a difficulty spike when you get to Act 5, and having all those progression systems did a better job at signposting the fact that things were going to get real hard from now on. When it comes to the world, I love the inspiration they took from New Zealand. GGG obviously is based in New Zealand, and you see a lot of stuff there. Maori things, cultures, magic, gods. There's a lot of things that have to do with the sea, myths. You also get a bit of all these inspirations and merge them into one game. And although it's impressive, I did find it a bit disjointing from time to time. Something that I really enjoy about Diablo is that the stakes are understandable. The world is also quite understandable and believable in a way. It's grim, it's dark, and I wasn't able to put my finger on it, but I felt like something was slightly off about Path of Exile and the world of Path of Exile. Maybe it's something that I can remedy by diving deeper into the lore. It wants to have a dark atmosphere, but I didn't really feel that throughout the game. We have to praise GGG for the amount of diversity that they have in all these acts when it comes to the environment. I've traveled through beaches, forests, ruins, dungeons, arenas, all kinds of different places. There was so much to explore, and I really enjoyed that part of it. I thought the environments were fantastic, and they really helped the game shine and become more than just another ARPG. There's a lot of diversity here, which makes sense. They've been working on this game for over 10 years now. Not to mention that you don't really need that much narrative exposition to understand what's going on in the world around you. For example, you could be in this huge town, and just by looking at the environment and reading the notes, you would be able to know that there was a civil war going on and that there was forces of good and evil and they were fighting against each other, and it's very nuanced and it's really good. We also should talk about the combat, because I feel like that's the meatiest part of this game, and it encapsulates so much, really. Compared to other ARPGs, I felt like Path of Exile was actually quite hard, quite difficult when it came to the combat, especially as I was playing a less than optimized build, right? The Nyx Vellum build, you can call it, I guess. And so I was often on my heels as the game kept ramping up the difficulty. The good part about this is that it pushed me to try different things, different gems, different pieces of gear. I just wish the game helped me a bit more when it came to trying out different builds. Unfortunately, you need a lot of resources to respec. And I've read all your comments, so I know that a lot of you defend this part of the game, saying that making meaningful choices that you can't come back on are very important to the game, but I don't necessarily agree. I think the ability to respec a talent tree is just a quality of life improvement. This difficulty curve never flattened. I was constantly going up and up the difficulty curve act by act. You could say that some bosses were easier than others, but the group of mobs never became easier. One of the key parts of the combat are your abilities, right? The part of the game where you socket gems into your gear, and you had green gems, blue gems, red gems, each of them for assassin builds, wizard builds, or a warrior build. And I found it to be really fun trying out different gems and figuring out what stuck. I think the game would have been a little bit more boring if I was just following a guide that told me what to do and when to do it. I got a lot of fun out of figuring out how gems worked and how deep that system went. My mind was really blown when I started playing around with the marks or on death abilities or on hit abilities, when I realized that I could make my ballistas shoot whatever spell I wanted and that the ballista would look and act differently based on the spell. Man, I was really sold. And for that reason, I think combat in the game is actually one of my favorite parts. It's quick, it's snappy, and it's engaging also. The one thing I wish was a bit different is the impact. I wish the skills had a bit more impact. I felt like most of the time I was kind of just clicking in the void, and then the health bars would go down and they'd die. And I feel like it would have been nice to see some feedback on the enemies themselves. But if GGG doesn't do that, I'm gonna guess there's a reason for it. And just on the combat alone, I could recommend this game to any ARPG player. Now, one part of the game that was contentious to me are the microtransactions. Coming from Diablo 4, microtransactions are something that really bother me. I don't really mind when they're visual, but I do feel like some things are taken away from the game. In Path of Exile, the game is free to play, right? So technically, you don't have to spend a dime to enjoy the game fully. And if, like me, you want to support the developers, you can buy cosmetic packs and tab improvements, which are definitely helpful. But other than that, there's nothing pay to win, I don't think, in Path of Exile, which is obviously a huge thing, right? That being said, as I was playing through the game and I was accumulating gear, unfortunately, similarly to Diablo 4, I think the aesthetics and appearances of characters suffer from having the microtransactions there because GGG and Blizzard put their most creative people and designers on these microtransaction cosmetics, and they make these amazing pieces of armor. Although, if I had to say something, is that the armor that you pay for in Path of Exile moves a little bit into the ridiculous for me sometimes. The colors are super flashy. You have wings, you have storms and clouds and stuff like that. And I know we're supposed to be a powerful character, but one thing I like about games is the ability to stay grounded. And for all its faults, Diablo 4 has some really exceptional looking armor sets. It's just really unfortunate that they're behind really high paywalls. So when it comes to the microtransactions, you can ignore them if you really want to. I thought there was a lot of great content that was free, and I think it's fair to throw a few bucks towards GGG to thank them for all their work in the past 10 years. So this brings us to my positives and negatives for Path of Exile as a Diablo 4 player. The biggest positive, by far, is the depth of things to do in Path of Exile. It's so vast and so deep and a bit scary in a way that I think it's probably the best ARPG on the market right now for hardcore players. Meaning that as a casual player myself, it's taken me a lot of time to get into Path of Exile compared to Diablo 4, which when I look back was actually quite a simple game. But for people who are itching for more, Path of Exile is the way to go. There are so many things to do at any given time that there's always something to work towards, which is really cool. And if you're a hardcore Diablo 4 player, I don't see why you're not playing Path of Exile. In my opinion, it's the better game when it comes to end game content by far. But when it comes to casual content, I think Diablo 4 has some great content as well. Talking about pros, the world building, the lore, the visuals, the environments, all of those were incredibly impressive. Obviously, GGG has done some great work there, and there's a lot to enjoy. Although I found it a bit disjointed sometimes, I have to applaud the effort that was put into this. When it comes to combat, it has to go into my pros. It's probably one of the best things about this game. The unique aspect of putting gems into your gear to get abilities that you can then level up. It's fantastic. It's really good. There's an incredible depth here that has served the Path of Exile community amazingly well so far. I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with Path of Exile 2. When I was working on this pros and cons list, I was thinking, where do I put this microtransaction part of the game? Does that fit in the pros or does that fit in the cons? And I can't really come up with a decision, so I think I'm going to have to put it in neither. It just is what it is. There are some quality of life improvements like the tabs, which are really worth it. And then there's some stuff that I just didn't enjoy that much. Like there are some skins that cost $50, very similar to Diablo 4, that I don't think look great. But that's the great thing about cosmetic microtransactions. They're completely optional. Another pro is the campaign. I don't think it's as good as Diablo 4. You can hate me all you want. I don't think the campaign is as good as Diablo 4 when it comes to a focused narrative. But I do think that there's a lot of really dynamic set points and bosses that elevate the campaign to such an exciting level that I can't help but applaud them for that too. So the campaign, definitely a pro. The progression systems in this game are like nothing I've ever seen before, and I'm so excited to see what they're going to do in Path of Exile 2. Many of you have told me that they're bringing everything over, and although that would be interesting, I really hope they don't. I want them to start fresh. I want them to start with a great foundation that is Path of Exile, but build something completely new when it comes to the features, when it comes to the systems. Try and innovate even more. I think that will lift the entire ARPG market forward. As much as Path of Exile 1 is obviously a huge success, I would really like to see them trying something different when it comes to onboarding new people, because if there's one thing at the top of my cons is that the game is the opposite of beginner friendly. The amount of systems that you need to read about, the amount of videos that you should watch if you want to have a good run is really daunting. It wouldn't surprise me if a lot of people start the game, are impressed by the systems, but are quickly overwhelmed with the amount of decisions. And I don't think we should take that decision away. I just think, a bit like what they did with World of Warcraft 3 or 4 years ago, they should rework that first act and create a better tutorial system so that people aren't put off. Because I could see a lot of people being put off after the first hour or two of this game, just by the sheer amount of things that there is to do and the amount of decisions that you're asked to make. I've finished the campaign, I've read all the comments, and I still don't understand a lot of things. So yeah, I really hope Path of Exile 2 comes with a much better first act. The reason I want this is because I feel like a lot of people would love Path of Exile, but they just don't really know where to start, or they just don't really know if it's for them. And unless we take the hands of those people and walk them through the first steps, I don't think the game will stick with them. And ultimately, what I want for Path of Exile, and for every video game out there, is to be the best that it can be. Another con for me was the black and white aspect of character builds. You see, because the game is so punishing to those who want to create their own builds or experiment, when I started this journey, a lot of comments were telling me I was a fool for trying to create my own build, that there was no point, that I should follow a guide. And I don't disagree with them. I had a harder time with the game because I was trying to follow my own guide, but I also feel like I had more fun. As I'm starting the campaign again, following a build, I'm really curious to see what that's gonna feel like. Any game that requires me to go through 20 hours of story or 20 hours of campaign before I can start having fun, it's just not worth it to me. But that being said, I'm also just a busy 30-year-old adult with a job and a family, so my downtime is quite precious to me. All in all, I think Path of Exile is one of the strongest ARPGs out there right now. My heart still belongs to Diablo, but as I'm going to be delving deeper into the endgame of Path of Exile, I'm really curious to see what awaits me there. One thing that I really need to stress, though, is that the community was nothing but fantastic. Since day one, I've had people reach out to me every single day, multiple times, asking if I wanted help. They all wanted to help me understand the game and bring me into the fold, right? It felt like a cult at times. And I think that has to do with the fact that people who play this game understand it deeply and understand the value that it can bring to people who love ARPGs, but there's a high difficulty ceiling in those first hours. I kept being insanely surprised looking at the amount of comments I got on these videos. If you look at the stats, these videos got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more comments than any of my other videos. And that's just because people were furious that I was doing the wrong thing. No, I think it's because people just wanted to help me. And I feel like through this series, I've made new friends and discovered a new community that has just wanted to help me since day one and has accepted me and involved me since day one with open arms. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I will be continuing the Path of Exile content because I love Path of Exile, and I'm really curious to see what's behind the door, the massive door that is endgame content. I hope you enjoyed the series. I want to thank everybody again for watching it, every single one of you. We have over 1 million views now on these videos. So again, thank you so much. Have an amazing rest of your day. And if you want to support me, you can join the YouTube membership or just come hang out on Discord. There's a link in the description. I'd love to have a chat with you. Come and tell me what you love about these games. And I'll see you in the next one.